What I have in front of me here is a DJI RS3 Pro gimbal. This is a relatively new release from DJI and has an impressive payload of 4.5 kilograms. In that, you would be forgiven for thinking that it may well be capable of supporting pretty much any item that we carry in our warehouse. However, what I'm aiming to demonstrate today are there are some situations where, despite equipment falling well within that 4.5 kilogram payload, it doesn't actually work as well as you'd hope. The camera and lens that I've got in position here is a Canon EOS R and a 24-105 kit lens. These are, to be honest, a perfect example of the sort of equipment that this gimbal is built for. Camera and the lens have a very similar weight distribution. The weight at the back and the weight at the front are quite similar, and it's very easy to achieve a perfect get balance on the gimbal. However, there are obviously situations where you may want to use a larger lens or a larger camera, and that distribution isn't as even. Now, the gimbal is designed to be able to shift the weight around along the various axes and essentially counterbalance some of that weight. However, you do get to a point where the gimbal isn't able to do it and there is just too much weight in one point. So what I'm going to essentially aim to do here is have a look at some of the various situations where that might happen and some of the things that can be done to either remedy it or prevent ending up in that situation in the first place. So yeah, we're going to have a look at those now. Okay, so the first example I'm going to look at here is a situation where there's a very long setup, I think is the best way to describe it. I've got here a Sony FX6 camera and a 70-200 GM Mark II lens. These come to about 2.5 kilograms in weight, so well within the payload. However, the camera itself is quite long and the lens itself is quite long. So in order to have any chance at all of achieving balance, the camera has to sit very far back on the plate here. What that means is that when it tilts back, hits the back of the gimbal here, and it rules out doing anything more advanced than a standard follow a single object type shoot. Which, if you were to power this on and give that a go, you'd probably find for that very straightforward, following a person down a corridor, for example, you'll probably find you'll be okay. But the minute you start trying to tilt back or tilt forwards or go into any of the more advanced modes, for example, if I try and tilt the gimbal round in order to get into underslung or flashlight mode, the two arms of the gimbal here collide and it simply doesn't work. In this instance, as I say, the setup as a whole is just a bit too long. The camera itself is by no means ruled out for this gimbal. If you were to use a more compact option, a Sony GM lens or one of the smaller zooms, 16-35 or the new 24-70 GM2 lens, both of those would be perfect. You could seat the camera that bit further forward and you wouldn't run into any of the problems that we're seeing here. The final thing you could do is use a smaller battery. The battery I've got here is a BPU 60. If you were to use the smaller, more compact BPU 30 or the newer version, the BPU 35, that would just take a little bit of length off the end here and make the battery flush to the back of the camera itself. Okay, so the next combination that we're going to take a quick look at is a compact camera and a large lens. So in this situation, there's far too much weight at the front of the setup. This is a Sony ZV-E10 camera body, which is probably one of the smallest Sony bodies that we carry in our warehouse. Then this is a Canon 70-200 Mark III lens. It's mounted via a Sigma MC11 mount converter. So as you can see here, the front of the gimbal is essentially being dragged down under gravity. The plate, the quick release plate here, is positioned as far back as it can possibly go, and there simply isn't enough weight at the back of the setup here for it to work. In slightly different scenarios, you might be able to consider putting some counterweight on this end of the gimbal. However, in this particular situation, I think you'd need to put about half a kilo onto the camera there in order to have a fighting chance of getting this to balance under its own momentum. And I think it would really, for this particular setup, it would be a case of having to use a smaller lens. For this camera, the Sony 18-110 or one of the smaller 24-70 models, 16-35, would be absolutely perfect. It's really a case of the lens is the problem here. The camera could absolutely work under different circumstances, but it is just a situation of too much weight at the front, not nearly enough weight at the back. So the next example that I want to quickly run through, I actually don't need the gimbal for this one. All I need is a camera with the wrong lens combination and the quick release plate in order to demonstrate. I've got here a Sony ZV-10 and mounted via a Sigma MC11 mount converter is a Canon Cine 50mm. As you can see, the lens itself has quite a wide diameter, and the camera itself has a very low profile lens mount. What that means is the plate, when I attempt to connect it to the riser block, which is ready in place on the camera, the front of the plate there snags the front of the lens, and try as you might, you can't actually click it cleanly into place. There are ways around this. You could get a third-party riser block, which would sit between the DJI block there and the base of the camera, and it would just allow the whole setup to sit about a centimetre or two lower, at which point it would just about hang underneath the lens and this problem wouldn't be an issue. But as things stand, it is something to definitely be aware of. If the lens does significantly underhang the base of the camera, then you can end up in a situation where it won't fit onto the base plate and it won't be able to go onto the gimbal. So yeah, not a particularly difficult problem to solve, but is something well worth being aware of before heading to a shoot with the equipment. So having explored some situations where the RS3 Pro might not be appropriate for certain cameras and lenses, we're going to have a look at a solution which allows for a lot more flexibility and a lot more weight. In front of me, this is the DJI Ronin 2. Mounted on it, I've got a Sigma 50-100 Cine zoom lens. Behind that is a Canon C300 Mark III. And behind that is the expansion unit that you would use for Gencode time lock and also mounting V-Lock batteries. This unit has a payload of 6.5 kilo or 6.4 kilos to be precise, approximately 2 kilos more than you would get with the RS3. It also has the ability to seat the camera a lot further back than you would have the ability to do on the RS3. It's generally just a lot more robust. So yeah, essentially this tends to be the solution that we go for in situations where the camera and lens are just too big to fit on anything else. If you are willing to remove monitors, microphone handles, anything that doesn't absolutely need to be on there, you can pretty much fit any camera that we carry on our website onto this gimbal.